God's will is the original blueprint for your life. Before your parents ever thought of you, before you were given a name, before you even took your first breath, God already completed the design of your life. You are not a random occurrence, nor are you a product of accident or coincidence. You are intentional. The Creator of the universe, who makes no mistakes and wastes nothing, mapped out your existence with precision and care. He placed within you gifts, abilities, and potential that are meant to be expressed in time, and those things can only find their true meaning when you discover and align yourself with His will. It is not enough to simply exist. You were not born just to breathe, eat, work, and eventually die. You were born to fulfill a divine assignment, a specific reason that only you can accomplish in this generation. This assignment is locked up in the will of God, and until you find it, you will live searching, chasing, and striving without true satisfaction. Every great building begins with a blueprint. The structure, the height, the foundation, the material, and even the wiring inside the walls are all determined before the first brick is laid. In the same way, your life was designed in eternity long, before time introduced you to earth. The greatest tragedy is not death, but life lived outside of that blueprint. When a building ignores its design, it collapses. When a life ignores the will of God, it becomes unstable. So many people are frustrated not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because they are pursuing plans never written in their blueprint. They try to build according to the expectations of society, culture, or even their own limited understanding, only to discover emptiness at the end of achievement. The will of God is not one option among many. It is the only plan that guarantees peace, joy, and fulfillment. God's will carries within it the map of your destiny. Imagine a manufacturer designing a product. Every product is created with a purpose in mind. A chair is designed to carry weight. A light bulb is designed to give light. A key is designed to open locks. If you use a key as a hammer, you may damage it, and it will never function at its highest capacity. Likewise, if you live outside of your purpose, you may survive, but you will never thrive. You will never know the true capacity of your life until you operate in the will of God. You may accumulate wealth, gather recognition, or enjoy temporary pleasures, but those things can never substitute for the satisfaction of living out the original intent of your Creator. The only way to find that intent is to seek the one who designed you. The problem with many people is that they confuse ambition with purpose. Ambition is what you desire for yourself. Purpose is what God desires for you. Ambition is fueled by competition, but purpose is fueled by conviction. Ambition runs after success, but purpose fulfills significance. Ambition makes you chase applause, but purpose brings eternal impact. You were not created to run after what others are doing or to measure yourself against someone else's success. You were created to fulfill a unique plan that no one else can fulfill in the same way. That is why imitation is the death of authenticity. When you compare yourself with others, you insult your own design. The will of God is not about copying, but about discovering what was uniquely written for you in eternity. The question then arises, how do you find this will? It begins with surrender. You cannot discover God's will while holding tightly to your own. The greatest battle in life is not between good and evil, but between your will and God's will. Every day you are faced with choices that either align with His plan or oppose it. The power of free will allows you to decide, but the wisdom of surrender leads you to submit your decisions to the one who knows the end from the beginning. Prayer is not just about asking God to bless your plans. It is about allowing Him to reveal His plans so that you may walk in them. When you align yourself with His word and listen for His guidance, His will becomes clearer, and you begin to recognize the path that leads to your destiny. You must understand that God's will is never hidden to punish you. It is hidden to protect you. It is not meant to be a mystery you can never solve, but a treasure waiting to be discovered through relationship with Him. The closer you draw to God, the clearer His will becomes. Just as a blueprint is revealed to the builder, so God reveals His plans to those who are willing to build their lives on His foundation. His will is not a prison, but a pathway to freedom. When you walk in it, you discover that the burden of trying to figure everything out disappears, and you begin to experience the peace of knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. Many people live frustrated because they are running after things they were never meant to chase. They enter careers that bring income but no fulfillment, relationships that bring pleasure but no purpose, and lifestyles that bring comfort but no meaning. They spend years climbing ladders only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. The will of God saves you from wasted years, wasted energy, and wasted potential. When you live according to His plan, even your mistakes become lessons that guide you forward, and even your setbacks turn into setups for greater progress. Nothing in your life is wasted when you are aligned with His will, because everything works together for good according to His purpose. Your blueprint was drawn with greatness in mind. God never designed mediocrity. He placed within you gifts that the world needs, talents that must be expressed, and solutions that only you can provide. But those things cannot emerge in their fullness outside of His will. The seed of greatness within you requires the soil of God's plan to grow. You cannot expect fruit from a seed planted in the wrong ground. Likewise, you cannot expect fulfillment from a life planted outside of the will of God. The blueprint shows not only who you are, but where you belong. It defines the environment, the timing, and the relationships that align with your destiny. When you submit to it, you discover that everything begins to fit, and your life takes on a rhythm of grace and purpose that no amount of striving could ever achieve. God's will is the original blueprint, and until you uncover it, you will always feel a sense of incompleteness, no matter how much you achieve. Deep inside every human being is a longing for meaning, a hunger that nothing in this world can satisfy except walking in the purpose of the one who created them. That hunger is the echo of the blueprint calling you back to alignment. When you ignore it, you live restless, but when you yield to it, you experience peace that surpasses understanding. The blueprint of your life is not just about your personal dreams, it is about the divine intention behind your existence. You were born to reflect the glory of God in a way that no one else can, and that is why His will is not only the key to your future, but the very essence of your existence. The will of God guarantees fulfillment, not frustration. Human beings were never designed to live a life of constant emptiness and unending striving. The Creator fashioned the human spirit with a built, in longing for completion, a desire for significance, a hunger for meaning, and a thirst for satisfaction. These deep cries of the soul can never be silenced by wealth, possessions, titles, or even relationships. They were placed in the human heart by God Himself, and they can only be answered when a person aligns with His will. That is why so many people, even those who appear to have everything, still confess to feeling unfulfilled. They climb the mountains of ambition, reach the peaks of success, and yet discover that what they thought would bring satisfaction has only left them with a deeper void. The frustration comes not because they are unaccomplished, but because they are pursuing life outside of the will of the one who created them. God's will was never intended to be a burden or a limitation. Many people fear the will of God because they think it will rob them of joy, strip them of dreams, and trap them in a life of sacrifice without reward. But the truth is the opposite. God's will is the guarantee of true freedom and genuine joy. When you live according to His plan, you are no longer running after temporary pleasures that leave you empty. Instead, you are walking in alignment with the eternal design that fills your soul with meaning. Fulfillment comes when the inside of you agrees with the outside of you, when your inner convictions align with your outer actions, and that agreement can only be achieved in the will of God. Frustration is often the fruit of chasing goals that were never yours to pursue. Many people spend years working hard at things that will never satisfy because they confuse business with productivity. They confuse activity with progress. They spend sleepless nights, pour in effort, and achieve recognition, but the inner void remains. That is because what you do outside of the will of God can never bring peace, no matter how much it impresses people. A life may look successful from the outside, but still feel wasted from the inside. True fulfillment is not measured by how much you accumulate, but by how much you are aligned with what God has called you to do. The applause of people can never silence the cry of your spirit for purpose. The will of God guarantees fulfillment because it was designed with your original makeup in mind. God does not call you to something that contradicts the gifts He has placed in you. He does not demand what He has not first supplied. Every ability, every passion, every natural inclination you carry is tied to His plan. When you function in His will, you find that what you do comes with a grace, a flow, and a sense of ease, even when it requires hard work. There is a difference between laboring with frustration and laboring with fulfillment. One drains you, the other energizes you. When you are in the will of God, even challenges push you closer to purpose, and even struggles deepen your sense of calling. There is a satisfaction that no paycheck, no trophy, and no applause can give, and that satisfaction comes only from knowing you are exactly where God wants you to be. The beauty of the will of God is that it takes the pressure off of human striving. When you live outside His plan, You feel the constant weight of trying to prove yourself, trying to compete, and trying to secure your own future. But when you live in His will, you realize that the outcome has already been secured. You do not have to manipulate doors to open because God Himself opens them in due season. You do not have to compromise your integrity to succeed because His plan already carries provision. You do not have to fear being overlooked because what God has written for you cannot be erased by men. Fulfillment comes when you walk in the peace of knowing you are moving with heaven's backing, not fighting against it. Frustration is also the result of misalignment. When a car's wheels are out of alignment, it drifts off course no matter how hard you try to steer it. Likewise, when your life is out of alignment with God's will, you find yourself constantly drifting, struggling, and never finding peace. But when you align with His plan, you discover that your life begins to move smoothly toward destiny. It does not mean there will be no storms, but even in the storm, you carry peace because you know you are in the right place. Fulfillment does not come from the absence of trouble. It comes from the assurance that you are on the right path despite the trouble. One of the greatest deceptions is believing that your fulfillment is found in pursuing your own will without consulting God. Human willpower can produce results, but it cannot produce fulfillment. You can build towers, gather crowds, and accumulate wealth by your own efforts. But if it is not aligned with God's will, it will ultimately collapse under the weight of emptiness. That is why so many people with fame and fortune still confess to misery. Fulfillment is not about how high you climb, but about whether you are climbing the mountain God assigned to you. When you climb the wrong mountain, you may enjoy the view, but the emptiness will remain because your soul knows you are in the wrong place. The will of God also guarantees fulfillment because it connects you to something larger than yourself. Human beings were not created to live self-centered lives. Deep within every person is a desire to matter, to make a difference, to leave a legacy. When you live in God's will, your life becomes a channel for something eternal. You are no longer just working for a paycheck or living for comfort. You are contributing to a purpose that will outlast you. That is why those who live in the will of God often speak of joy even in sacrifice, because they know their efforts are tied to something that will echo into eternity. Fulfillment comes when your life becomes more than survival and success. It becomes significance. Consider the difference between a lamp and a light bulb. A lamp without a bulb looks nice but cannot give light. A bulb without electricity exists but serves no purpose. But when the bulb is connected to the current, it fulfills its design and shines. In the same way, your life disconnected from God's will may exist but cannot fulfill its purpose. You may look good, sound successful, and appear impressive, but without the current of His will, you will never shine in the way you were designed to shine. Frustration is the result of disconnection, but fulfillment is the result of alignment. God's will guarantees fulfillment because He Himself is the source of all meaning. To be in His will is to be in the place of wholeness. To step outside His will is to step into a life of searching without finding. Every time you try to fill the void with things, with people, or with achievements, you discover that the satisfaction fades and the hunger returns. But when you are in His will, the hunger is satisfied, not because everything is perfect, but because you are living in the center of divine intention. That sense of knowing, that deep peace, that inner assurance, is the greatest fulfillment you can ever experience, and it is the evidence that you are walking in God's plan for your life. Your future is not in your imagination, but in God's intention. The human mind is powerful, and imagination is a gift that allows us to dream, create, and envision possibilities. But imagination, as beautiful as it is, was never meant to replace the divine plan that was written long before you existed. You do not create your destiny, you uncover it. You do not invent your purpose, you discover it. The one who made you also determined your end before your beginning, and that means your future is already established in the mind of God. When you try to build your future on imagination alone, without seeking the author of your life, you end up frustrated because no dream conceived by man can outlast the intention of God. Imagination is limited by experience, culture, environment, and knowledge. You cannot imagine what you do not know, but God's intention is rooted in His infinite wisdom that transcends human boundaries. Many times, what you imagine for yourself is smaller than what God has already prepared. Your vision may be good, but His intention is greater. You may imagine survival, but His will is abundance. You may imagine being known in your city, but His plan is to make you a voice to nations. You may imagine comfort, but His purpose is transformation. This is why surrender is greater than ambition. When you surrender your imagination to His intention, you exchange limitation for destiny, and you step into a future that carries eternal weight. The danger of living only by imagination is that it makes you the architect of your life, when in reality you were created to be a steward of a design already written. Architects draw the plans, but builders follow the plans. You were never called to be the architect of your destiny. God alone holds that role. You are called to build faithfully on the foundation He has already established. That means your greatest responsibility is not to dream up your own will, but to align with His will. Dreams conceived outside of His intention may excite you for a moment, but they cannot sustain you for a lifetime. They collapse under the weight of reality because they lack the eternal structure of divine design. It is not wrong to dream, but the highest dream you can ever have is to desire what God already intended for you. When your imagination bows to His intention, your life begins to move in rhythm with heaven's agenda. This is when doors open that you never knocked on, when opportunities arrive that you never orchestrated, and when paths clear that you never paved. You begin to realize that your life is not about random chances, but about divine alignment. The future you are trying to imagine is nothing compared to the future God has already written. For His word declares that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no heart has conceived the things He has prepared for those who love Him. This truth should bring peace to your heart, because it means your future is not fragile. It is not hanging in the balance of your limited imagination or your inconsistent emotions. Your future is secure in the unchanging intention of God. That is why storms cannot cancel it, enemies cannot destroy it, and failures cannot erase it. When you know that your destiny is anchored in God's plan, you no longer panic when things do not go according to your own imagination. You understand that delays are not denials, setbacks are not endings, and closed doors are not disasters. They are simply redirections to keep you aligned with the path God has already determined. Many people spend their lives chasing futures they imagine for themselves, only to discover that they were running in circles. They pursue careers, relationships, and lifestyles that look appealing in their imagination, but are far removed from God's intention. The result is weariness, disappointment, and a sense of being lost. But those who seek God's will discover that His intention carries peace even when the path is unclear. You may not see the entire map, but you walk with confidence because you trust the one who designed it. Faith is not blind optimism. It is trust in God's intention even when your imagination cannot grasp the details. Consider how a seed functions. A seed does not imagine what it wants to become. It already contains the intention of its creator. An apple seed will never become an orange tree, no matter how hard it tries to imagine otherwise. Its future is not in its imagination. It is in its design. In the same way, you already carry within you the intention of God. Your gifts, your passions, your inclinations, and your burdens are not accidents. They are indicators of His design. You may try to reimagine yourself into something else, but the greatest peace comes when you accept and embrace His original plan for your life. The seed of your destiny will only grow when planted in the soil of God's will. The world often teaches that you can be anything you want to be if you only imagine it strongly enough. But that is a lie that has left many people broken. You cannot be anything you want. You can only be what God intended. True greatness is not found in trying to become everything. It is found in becoming exactly what He designed you to be. When you align with His intention, you flourish, because you are not forcing yourself into roles you were never meant to carry. Just as a fish cannot live on land and a bird cannot thrive underwater, you cannot fulfill your destiny outside of your intended environment. God's intention is your true environment, and outside of it, no amount of imagination can give you fulfillment. Your imagination can give you a picture of possibilities, but only God's intention can guarantee destiny. That is why the most powerful prayer you can ever pray is not, God bless my plans, but God reveal your plan. When you pray this way, you invite heaven's wisdom to overrule your limited vision. You surrender the throne of your life to the one who knows your end from the beginning. You choose alignment over assumption. In doing so, you position yourself for a future that carries meaning, fulfillment, and eternal impact. The greatest men and women who changed history did not simply imagine futures for themselves. They yielded to God's intention for their lives. They understood that their purpose was not self-created but God-ordained. Their lives became testimonies of what happens when imagination surrenders to intention. The same is true for you. Your life will find its highest expression, not when you try to script your own destiny, but when you embrace the script already written in eternity. The author of life has already penned your story, and your role is to live it out faithfully, not to rewrite it with your own limited imagination. Obedience to God's will unlocks divine provision. Many people struggle through life because they are chasing provision while ignoring the key that unlocks it. They think that provision comes by running after resources, by fighting for opportunities, or by competing with others, but in reality, true provision follows vision, and vision comes from God's will. The moment you align yourself with His plan, everything you need to accomplish that plan begins to move in your direction. It may not always come in the form or timing you expect, but it will always come because God funds His own projects. He never assigns you to do something without already preparing the resources to make it possible. When you obey His will, you position yourself under the flow of heaven's supply, and you discover that provision is not something you chase, but something that is drawn to you. The principle is clear throughout Scripture and creation. Where there is purpose, there is provision. Look at the birds of the air. They do not store up or labor anxiously, yet God provides for them because they are fulfilling their role in creation. The fish in the ocean are sustained by the waters they were designed to inhabit. The flowers of the field are clothed with beauty they never had to manufacture. If creation that carries no eternal spirit is cared for so well, how much more will God provide for those who carry His image and are called to fulfill His will? Provision is never the problem. Obedience is. The issue is not whether God has the resources. He owns the universe. The issue is whether we are walking in the pathway where those resources have been appointed to meet us. Many people pray for provision but refuse obedience. They ask for blessings without aligning with the purpose those blessings were meant to serve. But divine provision is tied to divine assignment. God will not finance what He did not authorize. That is why some projects, no matter how exciting they look, remain dry and empty, because they were never birthed out of God's will. You can work tirelessly, invest heavily, and sacrifice greatly, but if what you are building does not come from God's instruction, the provision for it will always be a struggle. On the other hand, when you step into obedience, you discover that what seemed impossible begins to unfold. The doors you thought were locked swing open, the people you never expected to help appear, and the resources you thought were scarce suddenly become available. Obedience activates the current of divine supply. Obedience may not always make sense in the beginning. Sometimes God will lead you into places that seem barren or instructions that seem illogical. But those who obey soon realize that provision was waiting on the other side of their trust. When Abraham obeyed and left his father's house without knowing where he was going, he stepped into a future that was already prepared for him. When the widow obeyed the instruction to pour her little oil into empty vessels, she discovered a flow that did not run out until every jar was filled. When the disciples obeyed Jesus and cast their net on the other side of the boat, they experienced a catch so great that their nets began to break. Provision was already present, but it was their obedience that unlocked it. In the same way, what you are looking for is not as far as you think. It is tied to your next act of obedience. Obedience is the bridge between promise and provision. God may have promised you abundance, but until you walk in obedience, that abundance remains unseen. The promise is eternal, but the manifestation is conditional upon your alignment. Just as a seed carries within it the promise of a harvest, the soil of obedience is what allows it to grow. Without planting it in the right environment, the seed remains dormant. Likewise, without obedience, God's promises remain unfulfilled in your experience. The moment you choose to obey, even in the smallest things, you activate the process that brings provision into reality. It is important to realize that obedience is not about earning God's favor or buying His blessings. It is about alignment. God's will is like a river flowing with provision. Obedience is stepping into that river. When you walk in disobedience, you step out of the flow and wonder why life feels dry and empty. When you walk in obedience, you place yourself where the current carries you forward, and provision begins to flow naturally. This is why some people seem to walk with grace in everything they do. It is not luck. It is obedience. They are positioned in the right place at the right time, not by accident, but by choice to follow God's will. Divine provision is not only about material supply. It includes wisdom, strength, favor, relationships, and opportunities. When you obey God's will, He not only provides resources, but also equips you with everything you need to fulfill your assignment. The right people cross your path, the right doors open, the right wisdom comes at the right time, and even your weaknesses are covered by His strength. You begin to experience what it means to walk under grace. where things that would have been impossible in your own strength become possible because heaven's supply is working on your behalf. The tragedy of disobedience is that it disconnects you from provision. When you insist on your own way, you also take upon yourself the burden of providing for it. You have to struggle, strive, and manipulate because God will not fund what He did not plan. Many people are exhausted not because life is hard, but because they are carrying a burden they were never meant to carry. They are trying to provide for a vision they created, not one God intended. But when you return to obedience, the burden shifts. You discover that the weight of provision is no longer yours but God's, and He is more than capable of supplying all your needs according to His riches in glory. Obedience may sometimes require sacrifice. It may ask you to leave what feels secure in order to step into the unknown. It may demand that you let go of what looks sufficient so you can receive what is abundant. It may call you to trust God in ways that stretch your faith. But the reward of obedience always outweighs the cost. The provision that follows will not only sustain you, but will also overflow to impact others. God's provision is never just for you. It is always for the purpose of blessing those connected to your obedience. When you obey, you not only unlock your own provision, but also become a channel through which others are blessed. The truth is that provision is waiting for you at the place of obedience. The manna that fed Israel did not appear in Egypt. It appeared in the wilderness where God had led them. The water that sustained them did not flow until Moses struck the rock in obedience to God's word. The walls of Jericho did not fall until the people obeyed the instruction to march around them. Provision was not absent. It was positioned at the place of obedience. In the same way, your provision is already waiting at the coordinates of God's will. When you walk there, you will find that everything you need is already in place because the God who called you has already gone ahead of you to prepare it. God's will protects you from destruction. What seems right to human eyes can often lead to paths of ruin, disappointment, and even death, but the will of God is a shield that guards you from walking into dangers you cannot see. Human wisdom is limited. It only knows what is visible, what is logical, and what is immediately appealing. But God's will comes from His infinite knowledge of past, present, and future. He sees the traps before you, the snares hidden along the way, and the storms that could break you if you were unprepared. That is why, when you surrender to His will, you are not only choosing purpose, but also protection. The boundaries of His plan are not prisons. They are fences of safety keeping you from destruction. Every time you resist His will and insist on your own way, you expose yourself to dangers that you are not built to handle. Every time you align with His will, you step under the covering of His wisdom, His timing, and His foresight, and you discover that what looked like restriction was actually preservation. So many lives are destroyed not because God failed to protect them, but because they ignored His will. His will may sometimes require you to wait when you want to run, to say no when your desires say yes, or to walk away when your emotions beg you to stay. These instructions may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but they are saving you from heartache, from wasted years, and from consequences that could derail your destiny. Destruction does not always look like disaster at first. Sometimes it looks like opportunity. The wrong relationship may begin with excitement but end with brokenness. The wrong career may start with money but end with emptiness. The wrong choices may feel freeing but eventually bind you in chains. God's will sees beyond the surface and directs you away from what glitters but is not gold. His will shields you from destruction disguised as success. The will of God not only protects you from external dangers, but also from self-destruction. The human heart is deceptive and can easily lead you astray with its desires. Many people sabotage their own futures by following feelings instead of faith, desires instead of direction, and impulses instead of instruction. But when you live according to God's will, you learn to discipline your heart and to submit it to His higher wisdom. His will refines you, shapes your character, and delivers you from your own weaknesses. Sometimes God's will says no, not because the thing itself is evil, but because you are not ready for it yet. If you received it too soon, it would destroy you. If you carried it unprepared, it would crush you. His will protects you by timing your blessings so that what should be a gift does not turn into a curse. Protection in God's will does not mean you will never face trials, but it means that no trial will destroy you. You may walk through fire, but you will not be consumed. You may go through deep waters, but you will not drown. The will of God allows trials to refine you, not to ruin you. Even what the enemy intends for harm, God redirects into good when you remain in His plan. This is why you can have peace in the middle of storms, because you know the storm cannot kill you if you are in the boat of God's will. The danger is never the storm itself. The real danger is being outside of His plan when the storm comes. His will is the anchor that keeps you steady and the shelter that covers you when life becomes uncertain. Many people misinterpret closed doors as rejection, but sometimes closed doors are the very protection of God's will. You may have prayed for an opportunity and felt disappointed when it did not happen, but what you did not see were the consequences that would have followed if you had entered it. You may have begged God for a relationship to work out, but when it fell apart, He was saving you from years of pain. You may have tried to force a plan that kept collapsing, but His will was keeping you from building on unstable ground. What feels like a setback may actually be a rescue. What feels like delay may be preservation. God's will often protects you silently, saving you from dangers you will only understand in hindsight. The protection of God's will is also seen in the boundaries of His commands. Many people view the principles of God's word as restrictive rules, but they are protective guidelines. A car has brakes not to limit your speed, but to preserve your life. A fence around a cliff is not to rob you of freedom, but to save you from falling. In the same way, God's will establishes moral, spiritual, and relational boundaries that keep you from destroying yourself. When you ignore those boundaries, you step into destruction. But when you honor them, you remain under His covering. Holiness is not just about pleasing God, it is also about protecting your own destiny from ruin. Obedience is not just about submission, it is about survival. The reality is that every life is headed in one of two directions, either toward fulfillment in God's will or toward destruction outside of it. The choice is yours. The road that looks wide and easy often ends in destruction, but the narrow path of God's will leads to life. It may not always be popular, it may not always please people, it may not always satisfy your temporary desires, but it will always protect you. When you choose His will over your own, you are choosing life over death, peace over chaos, and preservation over loss. Protection is not just about survival, but about positioning. God's will not only keeps you from harm, but also positions you where His blessings can reach you. Sometimes He removes you from places or people that feel comfortable but are toxic to your future. Sometimes He shifts you into environments that stretch you but are designed to grow you. His will moves you away from counterfeit safety into true security. That transition may feel painful, but it is a form of divine protection. God protects not only by keeping danger out, but also by keeping you in the right place. Ultimately, the greatest protection in God's will is the assurance that nothing can destroy you unless He permits it for your good. This confidence allows you to live without fear, to take bold steps, and to pursue destiny without hesitation. Even when you walk through valleys, you know that the valley is part of the journey and not the end of the story. Even when enemies rise against you, you know they cannot prevail because your life is hidden in the will of God. His will is your shield, your fortress, your covering, and your safe place. Outside of it, you are vulnerable, but inside of it, you are untouchable in the sense that no weapon formed against you will prosper. The will of God is the key to eternal impact. Every human life carries the potential to make a mark, but not every mark endures. Many people spend their years building names, empires, businesses, and reputations only to watch them fade with time. Monuments crumble, wealth passes into other hands, fame is forgotten, and achievements are replaced by the next generation's pursuits. What seems great today may be irrelevant tomorrow. But when a life is lived in alignment with the will of God, it produces impact that time cannot erase. Eternal impact is the fruit of a life rooted in eternal purpose. It is not measured by how long people remember your name on earth, but by how heaven records your obedience in eternity. The truth is that only God's will carries eternal weight. Everything else, no matter how impressive, eventually fades. This is why so many people reach the end of their journey and look back with regret, realizing they spent decades chasing shadows. They were busy but not impactful, successful in the eyes of men but bankrupt in the eyes of God. Eternal impact cannot be manufactured by human effort. It is birthed by divine intention. When you step into the will of God, your life becomes more than existence, more than survival, more than accumulation. It becomes a channel through which eternity touches time, a vessel through which God manifests His purpose in history. Eternal impact does not always look grand in the eyes of men. Sometimes it is hidden in small acts of obedience that ripple through generations. A word spoken in season, a sacrifice made in faith, a decision to obey when it was costly. These are the seeds that echo into eternity. The will of God often asks for things that seem insignificant, but heaven knows their weight. Moses obeyed and struck a rock, and water flowed for a nation. A boy gave his lunch in obedience, and thousands were fed. Mary said yes to the will of God, and the Savior entered the world. Eternal impact was hidden in simple obedience, but the results outlasted time itself. You may never see the full effect of your obedience on earth, but eternity will reveal it. Living in God's will ensures that your life outlives you. What you do in your own will dies with you, but what you do in God's will lives on. Every business you build, every house you buy, every accomplishment you achieve will one day pass away. But the souls you touch, the truth you live, and the legacy you leave in God's will remain forever. Eternal impact is not about being remembered, it is about being relevant to God's eternal agenda. You may not be remembered by history books, but if you fulfill His will, heaven remembers your obedience forever. This is why aligning with God's will is the most important decision you can ever make. It determines whether your life is wasted or invested. A wasted life may be filled with activity, wealth, and attention, but if it is outside of God's will, it evaporates like smoke in the wind. An invested life may not always be glamorous, but it multiplies in eternal value. God's will turns ordinary people into instruments of extraordinary impact. It takes fishermen and makes them apostles. It takes shepherds and makes them kings. It takes exiles and makes them prophets. Your background does not matter, your surrender does. The measure of eternal impact is never in human credentials, but in divine obedience. Eternal impact also means that your influence transcends time. When you live in God's will, your words, your actions, and your legacy continue to bear fruit long after you are gone. Abraham obeyed, and nations still call him father. David obeyed, and his lineage carried the Messiah. Paul obeyed, and his letters still transform lives centuries later. These were men who were not perfect, but they aligned with God's will, and their impact still shakes the earth. In the same way, your obedience to God's will today can influence people you will never meet, places you will never visit, and generations you will never see. Eternal impact stretches beyond your lifetime into God's timeless plan. There is also a profound peace in knowing that when you walk in God's will, nothing you do is in vain. Outside of His will, effort is wasted. Inside His will, every effort counts. Every prayer whispered, every seed sown, every sacrifice made, every act of faith. All of it is recorded in eternity. Even the moments that feel unseen and unrewarded on earth are treasures stored in heaven. You may not always see the fruit immediately, but eternal impact is not measured by immediacy. It is measured by eternity. This truth frees you from the need for human recognition, because you understand that your true reward comes not from applause, but from obedience. God's will is also the key to eternal impact, because it aligns your life with His eternal kingdom. The kingdoms of men rise and fall, but His kingdom is everlasting. When you live for your own will, you are building for a kingdom that will crumble. But when you live for His will, you are building for a kingdom that will never end. This means that your impact is not confined to a generation or a century, but is woven into the eternal purposes of God. This is why Jesus taught us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." The will of God is the bridge between time and eternity. To live in it is to live for something that death cannot erase and time cannot diminish. So many lives are consumed with temporary pursuits, but eternal impact comes when you ask the deeper question, what will last forever? What part of my life will echo in eternity? The answer is always tied to the will of God. You may chase wealth, but you cannot take it beyond the grave. You may gain fame, but it cannot follow you into eternity. You may achieve power, but it will dissolve when your breath leaves your body. Only what is done in the will of God will cross the line between time and eternity. Only what aligns with His purpose will stand when everything else falls. The truth is that every day you are either sowing into eternity or wasting what has been given. Every decision to obey God, no matter how small, carries eternal consequence. Every step outside His will may bring temporary pleasure, but leads to eternal loss. That is why the greatest tragedy is not the loss of life, but the loss of purpose. To die outside of God's will is to live a life that never touched eternity. But to live and die in His will is to secure a legacy that never dies. Eternal impact is not about how long you live, but about how well you align with God's intention for your life. The will of God is the key that unlocks significance beyond human comprehension. It transforms fleeting existence into eternal relevance. It ensures that your life is not wasted on things that pass, but invested in things that last. It turns your time on earth into a contribution that heaven values forever. And when you stand before God at the end of your journey, Eternal impact will not be measured by the trophies in your hands, but by whether you fulfilled His will. To hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," is the ultimate evidence of eternal impact, because it means your life accomplished what heaven intended from the beginning. My friend, the greatest tragedy in life is not death, but a life lived outside of God's will. Death is inevitable, but destiny fulfilled is a choice. You were not created to experiment with life or to drift through existence hoping to stumble into meaning. You were born with intention, designed with precision, and sent into time to accomplish an eternal assignment. Your future is not hidden from you, it is hidden for you, waiting to be discovered in the will of God. True success is not measured by how much you have done, but by how much of God's purpose you have fulfilled. It is not how many years you live, but how much of His will you live out in your years. Everything you are chasing, whether it is wealth, influence, or recognition, will lose its power the moment your breath leaves your body. But the will of God will carry you beyond the grave and into eternity. That is why you must not waste your life pursuing what looks good while ignoring what is God. The will of God is your safety, your provision, your direction, and your eternal impact. It is the only guarantee that your life will matter, not just on earth, but forever. So today, choose to align your steps with His purpose. Choose to surrender your plans to His intention. Choose to trade the temporary for the eternal. For when you live in God's will, you unlock the blueprint of your future. You release fulfillment instead of frustration. You discover that your destiny is not your invention, but His intention. You walk into provision that is waiting for your obedience. You are protected from destruction that hides in your own desires, and you leave an impact that eternity will forever honor. If you want to know the key to your future, it is not hidden in your education, your connections, or your ambition. It is hidden in the will of God. Align yourself with it, and your life will not just make a living, it will make a difference. Align yourself with it, and your years will not just be counted, they will count. Align yourself with it, and when history forgets your name, eternity will still echo your obedience. For the will of God is not only the key to your future, it is your future.